Hello again, and welcome to another episode of the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. As always, I am your host, Robb Nelson. Today, we are going to be talking about the much-loved topic of the State Fair. This is a Nebraska history podcast. We are going to be talking about the history of the Nebraska State Fair today. I am going to be joined in the first segment of our show with Cynova, the Director of Interpretation from Stuhr Museum, and we're going to delve deep into the history of this vast topic. And then later in the podcast, we are going to shift gears and talk to somebody who works today with the State Fair of Nebraska, Jaime Parr. So please sit back and enjoy the show. Thank you so much. Welcome back to another episode of the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. I am Robb Nelson, and today I'm joined again by the ever-popular co-host of the Stuhr Crazy Podcast, Cynova.
That's hilarious.
Thank you, and welcome back.
Thank you.
I really enjoy our conversations. I feel as a couple of historians here, we kind of go into the woods a lot more than maybe some other people might.
I think we can get on some tangents that could be slightly entertaining.
Yeah. Well, I know today we're going to go there because we're talking about the history of the State Fair.
Yes.
And I know that fairs in general are a very special topic for Kay, and yes. I know she's chomping at the bit to kind of jump into some of these questions.
Oh, well, yeah. I kind of like fairs. It's been a research passion of mine for literally decades. So, and I've had a lot of history with fairs in general, you know, as a kid involved in 4-H and all that other stuff. So it's just kind of a natural, I don't know why. I like them.
No, hey, I get it. Why don't I just jump right in and give you the first question I have here. What exactly is a state fair, and how did these events originate in our country's history?
Well, interestingly enough, there's a book called The American Agricultural Fair, the pattern. It explains how fairs, which most of our fairs would be considered agricultural fairs, how they originated and how they evolved through time. The book is by Fred Kniffen, K-N-I-F-F-E-N. Good with pronunciation.
Yeah.
Here for that. But he said that agricultural societies and fairs tend to develop along the certain paths. The United States has their roots. The fairs have roots at European fairs, which were more market-based type fairs. Ours tended to be more agricultural-based. And so they developed very early on in the eastern part of the United States. And as the nation grew, the fairs grew with them.
Yeah, I have one account here that, you know, and this is kind of up for debate, who had the first fair ever.
Yeah, it's always going to be up for debate.
But one that I found in what seems to be the popular conception is that in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, there was an early fair in 1807 that was orchestrated by a man named Elkanah Watson.
Oh.
And this was just a small affair consisting only of sheep shearing demonstrations. And from there, if you can imagine, it just kind of grew to a thing yearly where different farmers would showcase livestock. And, you know, as you kind of elaborate on it, there become activities for men, there become activities for women. Oh, then we have to have activities for children.
And then we have to have all these other fun things that happen. And I think that probably early on, some of them kind of started with a market type fair because that's something that people would have known in Europe. But as the nation grew and they learned about, well, we have to learn how to deal with agriculture in this area. And a lot of the fairs across the nation were developed as agricultural fairs.
Yeah.
And or some of the advertisements, even the Hall County Fair is advertised as an agricultural college, a place where farmers could come and learn about the newest, the best, the latest, the greatest in the world of farming and agriculture and poultry, livestock, all of that stuff. And then you throw in the domestic interest where you have people doing sowing and exhibiting produce, farm produce, not only farm produce, but garden produce flowers and all of that. And it just becomes a place where you can learn about something different that you might not have an opportunity otherwise.
Yeah, and I'm sure it mirrors just kind of the culture of the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're
time
talking
and area.
You're talking about 1807.
Yeah.
You're talking, I mean, the first state fair, if we want to call it the first recognizable state fair, took place in Syracuse, New York in 1841. And that was aimed at, you know, it was a 2-day event that focused on educating people about agriculture, animal exhibits, you know, speeches by politicians, the things we would kind of recognize sort of loosely as a state fair. But, you know, you get a little bit later on, you get into the 1880s, 1890s, and you start having this period of industrialization, and the exhibits start to kind of take on that form as well.
We have the regular exhibits, but then here comes all of the manufacturers. As industrialization rises, you have all these companies wanting to show off their products. And so these vendor halls develop as a part of these fairs at the local level and at the state level. And so you start getting the Singer Sewing Machine Company bringing in exhibits, big, massive exhibits that they would put on at county, state, and then expositions that were held across the country. Farm companies, John Deere, they would bring exhibits of their latest and greatest stuff so that everybody, it was a chance for everybody to see new things and learn new things. And if you think about life on the plains, life out, if you're in a new world, and here comes the fair, and it's a chance for something to break the monotony. It had to have been just like a bee to honey, just going and just seeing and probably having a fantastic time.
Yeah. And I think you and I are both of the opinion that during the period that we're talking about, I think there was a sense of community in a way that there maybe isn't now, or at least it's different.
It's much different today than it was then.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking about a time when people maybe aren't from these urban centers and maybe they haven't even developed yet, the chance to come to a town and interact was a special occasion that no one was going to miss. And, it looks like in New York, it says there were somewhere between 10 and 15,000 people that went to this first one. That's in New York.
Yeah.
So think about the amount of people we're talking about.
That's a large amount of people for that. Well, and the other thing, in relation to the Nebraska State Fair is if you went to the state fair, your secret was out because it got published in the newspaper. I was looking at newspaper accounts and it would list so-and-so went to the fair, so-and-so went to the fair. And it was just all of these who went to the state fair. And so everybody who read the paper knew who went to the state fair. So they would go talk to them. Well, what'd you see? What'd you do? What was different? Should I go?
Yeah.
All of that stuff probably happened.
In the in-town and township sections of paper. I love those so much. Those are great.
Oh, yeah.
You can just flip through those and see. Betty Jenkins visited her grandmother in Aurora this weekend.
Oh, yes. Those are a fountain of information, and that's a side tangent that could take us into a whole other podcast.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Nebraska's history a little bit, and I kind of wanted to get us into that section because this is a Nebraska historical podcast.
Yes, it is.
Where does Nebraska kind of fit into that narrative of the history of state fairs? When was ours? The first one.
Starts territorially.
Yeah, before we were even a state.
It was 1859. 59.
Yes.
Was the territorial fair, and it was a 3-day fair, and I believe it was held in
Nebraska City.
Nebraska City, yeah, because they kind of jumped around there, and then the first official state fair was held in 1868.
Yeah, so that's. Nebraska becomes a state 1867.
Right.
A year later.
Yes, but the foundation was laid by then territorial governor Alvin Sanders as early as 1866, recognizing the need for agricultural education in the future state. And so part of the legislative session, he called for the advancement of interest in agricultural societies or agricultural fairs.
Yeah.
So it starts then.
And I know that over the years it's been in as many as 5 different locations. I think it's been in, we said Nebraska City. It was then in Brownsville for a year, which is kind of hard to believe. Omaha, Lincoln, and now in Grand Island.
Right.
So that's 5.
Right.
So it's seen its voyages throughout the 150 years that we're talking about. Yeah,
and it's interesting. It's very interesting that the state fair did end up in Grand Island because we started asking for it a long time ago. We started asking for it, I think it was 1889.
Oh, really?
Yes. Actually, in June 1889, there were all kinds of reports in the Independent about the improvements that they'd made in the county fair. And so it was suggested, of course, in the Independent that perhaps the city of Grand Island seeks to relocate the state fair here. They weren't successful at that particular point in time, but I don't think that was the last time that they tried either.
It makes more sense to have a more centralized location.
Yeah, and that was the argument that they were using, that it would have been more centrally located for the state. People from the West, especially in the 19th century, travel from the western part of the state would have been so much easier to exhibit at a state fair if it was centrally located.
Yeah. So what kind of attractions are we talking about when we say that these things developed agriculturally, industrially? I'd kind of like to kind of go into a bit more of that. I know as industrialization takes place, you see automobile races. Mm-hmm. That's something you don't see anymore. Bicycle races, maybe they don't.
The first big one for ours were horse racing.
Okay.
The first big one was horse racing because now there was actually, they put in place for the county level that there could not be horse racing. There should not be horse racing that you could bet on at a county level. And I'm sure that was really, really easy to police as people were making side bets over in the corner and that type of thing. But they did say that time trials were okay. So the time trials are what officially happened, but it was a horse race. A horse race is a horse race. Later on, it morphs into bicycle races and other one of the races was these slowest cart race that I read about at one point. There was really strange things, and then there was things like catch a grease pig, climb a grease pole, get the money, because there's this giant bag of money on top, and if you can get up to the top of that pole, you're going to get that money. There was later on automobile racing and all of that. Then as fairs evolved, you start getting the sideshows, and you start getting the carnivals,
sure,
where you have the carnival sideshows, the trials to see how well you can shoot a gun, and hit targets and that type of thing. Much later on, you start getting girly shows. You get people like fortune tellers. Yeah. All of these different types of side entertainments, more along the lines of entertainments. Now there would be disclaimer, this area for entertainment purposes only.
Yeah.
But some of it was taken to heart.
Yeah, I know. Like the period I'm kind of thinking of, I think is 1950s, 1960s. The fair sort of loses its wholesome sheen.
Yes, it does.
There's alcohol present. There's maybe burlesque sorts of shows.
Alcohol and gambling was outlawed at the fair in 1879.
Oh, wow.
It was outlawed. Doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But you have all the girly shows and the come learn about the birds and the bees type of things in some of the shows. Yeah.
So they actually tried to make it educational, or just
I'm not sure if they really tried.
Okay.
It's just, if you look at some of the images and some of the information about that, I think that there could be a massive tome about all the different things, the evolution of state fairs and what happened at state fairs.
Well, I know one tradition that's kind of seemed in my mind to be always there, at least in my lifetime, and going at least a few decades before that, is the presence of political figures making stops on the campaign trail.
It's an opportunity to see a lot of people in one space.
Yeah.
I mean, why wouldn't you show up for that?
Yeah, I mean, and now especially, the Iowa State Fair is I think most popular one.
It's one of the pinnacle fairs, yes.
Well, like in terms of political candidates stopping there, because it's the first caucus primary state, and so everybody comes there and tries to prove how regular they are by eating some ridiculously fried on a stick concoction that's been thought up that year.
Yeah.
But as far back as 1956, I did find one article that said that Dwight Eisenhower in re-election had a booth where you could, meet General Eisenhower and as
popular as he was, I imagine he had a lot of people come see him.
I can only imagine what his hand must have felt like at the end of the day, shaking all those hands.
How hoarse he was from talking to people.
I mean, that's part of the job, I guess.
Yeah. That was a big thing. There's all kinds of different things that happened at fairs, but in the early, I want to mention that in the early history of the state fair, they actually had county exhibits. So the various counties, not all counties, but a lot of the counties would put together exhibits and take them to the state fair. And so in 1883, the Hall County Agricultural Society took exhibit of produce to the county, to the state fair, and they won for 3 consecutive years.
Oh, wow.
I found in where they were asking in the Platte Valley Independent in 1878 for everybody to submit examples of grain, fruit, vegetables, and etc., so that they can create this exhibit at the fair. And then in 1883, they won, and the anti-monopolist crowed a 3-column thing all about the win that Hall County did. The early ones, they won a gold medallion. No one knows what happened to those. I would love to know what happened to those. Eli Barnes and Henry Harrison were the early ones involved with the county fair. They had to have had them. Don't know what happened to them.
They were real gold.
Yeah. And then the last one that they won, they got $250 for the county plus a Jersey cow. And there's a photograph in our archives of a number of gentlemen communing with this Jersey cow, and I wonder if that's the one. But yeah, at the county level, you could go and the county could take things to the state fair and win. And in some, Grand Island did pretty good there for a while.
Yeah, that story just reminds me of this great piece that the museum has in our permanent collection. It's a sewn together quilt of all of Robert Taylor's prize-winning ribbons that he received for his sheep being judged at various state fairs throughout the Midwest. It's a 6-foot-long, 2-foot-wide quilt, and it's made up of first-place ribbons from the Iowa State Fair, the Minnesota State Fair, the Nebraska State Fair, the Illinois State Fair, and it's 87 award ribbons, and I'm sure he had many, many more.
Yeah. Because he had international wins for his sheep. He was probably the best known. In fact, a lot of the sheep that are in existence in this nation are probably descendants of Robert Taylor's sheep.
I would imagine. And, these are from 1901. He, by that time, was the largest producer of sheep in the country, if not the world at that time.
Yeah, that could be argued.
Yeah,
he had a phenomenal area that he had sheep.
But this just is a great piece of material culture in my mind, and it really gets to kind of the heart of what we're talking about, that it meant enough to him that he kept all these and created this lasting legacy that celebrates the importance of state fairs in this community, and what that, he could be this huge successful businessman, but what he chose to remember were these community moments of being judged just by
everyday people
that he interacted with. Well, and I just think that's a really neat part of history.
And it's a prime example of basically he was saying, my sheep won these.
Yeah.
And that's a real source of pride there. And I imagine it's quite a colorful piece too. So.
Oh yeah, reds and blues and whites and yellows and all those
golds and all those different colors. Yes.
Well, I know that the state fair hasn't always, given the year that it was taking place in, it was subject to the world moving around it just like anything else is. And I know the state fair has been canceled twice.
Yes.
in Nebraska's history. Do you know the history associated with those?
Well, the very first one was in 1898 when the Trans-Mississippi Exposition was going to take place in Omaha, because remember that the State Fair was moving around and Omaha was the location. Well, the Trans-Mississippi Exposition is a lot like a fair, probably with more industrial edge than agricultural edge, but they felt that would be too much competition to hold both of them, so they canceled it that year. The Trans-Mississippi Exposition was quite the thing in the riverfront area of Omaha, and there were excursion trains that went from all over the state to there. And that could be said for any fair that happened, is there were excursion trains from different cities across the state to get to wherever the state fair was being held. But in 1898, it was the Trans-Mississippi.
That was a big deal. I mean, that was every bit as grand as you can imagine that Nebraska could create for that time.
Think World's Fair.
Yeah.
It was along the lines of a World's Fair.
The only other time I know that the fair was canceled was in 1945.
Yeah, World War II.
And I think the war had almost come to an end by the time, but they still decided to cancel it because they didn't know at the time that it was going to end.
Right,
so they already made the determination ahead of time to go ahead and cancel it.
Well, if you think about what goes into putting together a fair, I mean, this fair will end, the current state fair will end in a week or so, and they'll start planning it the next day afterwards. Sure. for next year. So a lot of massive amount of work goes into putting together these things. So you have to think ahead. And where we were when they started planning the 45 fair, they probably went, we don't know what it's going to be like. It's kind of like with today with the Delta variant of COVID as to, should we or shouldn't we type of thing.
Yeah. And like just doing research for this podcast, I dove into some old newspapers, one of which I found was from 1935. It was the Grand Island Herald. And it was talking about the state fair in that year that was coming up and how, this is a nation at that time, 1935, that's in the grips of the Depression. And they're just maybe starting to come out of it a little bit, at least by the tone of this article. And it struck me the way that it's written. You could have almost written it for 2021 following the COVID year.
Or probably even the very same thing after the teens, the Spanish flu pandemic.
Exactly.
History keeps repeating itself.
Yeah, I mean, last year, 2020, they had it, but it was significantly scaled down, scaled back. And see if you can tell if this article is written in 1935 or 2021. There's this paragraph that says, "The people of Nebraska have struggled hard these past couple years, but they never gave up. Neither has the state fair. Every year, good or bad, the state fair has made its bow, presenting the best it had to the people of the state in a way of any exposition. It will all be there this year, not just bigger and better, but greater and finer." And that's from 1935.
It could be written today.
And I think that's the whole point, and that's what always I come back to as a historian is, these events might have happened a long time ago, but they were still people living them, just like there are people living them today who are the same kind of people with the same kind of hopes, the same kinds of fears and dreams and all the rest. And they just weren't that different from us.
No,
and it's hard to
really not.
It's hard to get people to kind of realize that sometimes.
They wanted distractions just like we want distractions now. We want to be able to step on the state fairgrounds and be able to just kind of take a moment and enjoy ourselves. And they did as well. Yeah.
I think that's a good place to leave it. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with more of the Stir Crazy podcast on the State Fair after these words.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Travelers Home Boarding House. For boarding and lodging by the day or the week, see Miss Schoenfeld at the Travelers Home, located just south of Elfman's Barbershop on Front Street. Bathing room available for the ladies. Hot meals offered to lodgers on a nightly basis. Come, stay, and enjoy your time in Railroad Town.
We are back with more of the Stuhr Crazy podcast. I am joined today by Jaime Parr, the Deputy Executive Director of the State Fair, Nebraska. Jaime, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to visit with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. I know the State Fair just closed its doors over the long Labor Day weekend, so this has given you a chance to sit down with us and talk a little bit more, take a little bit more time from your what I'm sure was your hectic schedule, right?
We are in the midst of cleanup, but like I said, I'm glad to visit with you. Always enjoy talking about the Nebraska State Fair.
So how long have you been associated with the State Fair and been a part of this organization?
About 23 years. I started with the fair in 1998, July of 1998.
And during that time, I'm sure you've seen quite a few changes. Has the State Fair undergone significant, alterations in terms of what it offers, things of that nature?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, since 1998, the fair has seen many highs and lows in different capacities. Of course, we had the big move from Lincoln to Grand Island, and the amazing support that we've seen from the volunteers in the Grand Island, Central Nebraska area.
And what about the State Fair made you want to become a part of the organization? How did you get involved in it originally?
It just sounds, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. It just sounds fun, right? To work at the Nebraska State Fair. Who wouldn't want to?
Hey, I agree. I'm a Lincoln kid myself, and I grew up going to it. I actually have been here in Grand Island for a couple years, and over the weekend was my first trip out to the Grand Island State Fair component. But I was happy to take part in it again. It still looked like it was a great turnout for you guys.
We had a great year, Rob. I'm so glad you were able to come out and join us this year. We hope you'll make that an annual adventure in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely plan to. It's just, like I said, I've been here a couple years, and last year with COVID, we didn't make the trip out, and I'm assuming that was the case for a lot of people. Has there been a change or a revert back to normalcy this year of sorts compared to last year with the COVID situation?
Yeah, last year we added a lot of spread mitigating tactics to the partial fair that we were able to put on. In 2020, we did have our livestock shows for our 4-H and our FFA youth competitors. We were able to put on some open class contests as well. And then we had a very limited number of food vendors and merchandise concessionaires and other activities that is far reduced in 2020 from a typical event. 2021, we're able to get back to full capacity as far as allowing people to gather and enjoying concerts, and then having our full regimen of vendors and concessionaires at the fair. So we were very pleased for that. We did maintain those mitigating tactics this year at the State Fair. So we did have masks available. We encouraged social distancing. And, of course, those hand-washing stations are always abundant at State Fair.
Of course. You mentioned quite a few, organizers and employees there in that last response. Is there just must be a huge infrastructure that you're a part of and maybe even in the lead of. Do you know generally how many people go in from the top down into making the State Fair a success year after year in terms of employees and volunteers, etc.?
So many, Rob. We have so many. It takes so many people to build this little village, this mini village, for 11 days in the heart of Nebraska. We have typically around 500 employees during State Fair time, and then our volunteers range anywhere from a couple hundred in 2020 up to, I think our highest point in 1 year was 1,100 people who volunteered. We really could not put on the quality of event without all of those folks, the volunteers, the superintendents, the year-round staff. All those people have to come together, and some of them are in the office year-round, but others touch base with us just at fair time or maybe for some meetings leading up to fair. and then we come together and put on an 11-day festival. So that's pretty exciting, but it does take a lot of people to make that happen.
Yeah, I can only imagine. You're giving new meaning to the phrase, it takes a village, because it takes a village to make a village, I assume, as well.
It does. Yes, sir. I agree completely.
So for 2022, we are a day after the closing. Does the planning for State Fair 2022 begin today? Is that the plan?
Well, it has begun, absolutely. We're always looking ahead, and our goal really is to be able to try to be planning for things a couple, 2 or 3 years out. Right now, we're probably at about a year out, but we are, thinking about our entertainment and our layouts and our livestock contest and our static exhibits, where those items will be on the property, as well as what dates and who can help us facilitate those attractions.
Yeah, you mentioned that's your overall goal. Do the goals of the State Fair kind of change on a year-to-year basis in terms of what you're trying to offer the community? I mean, the culture changes in Nebraska just like anywhere else over the years, and so I assume that there are things that maybe are more popular depending on the year in question, and maybe some things wane or come back in popularity. Have you been a part of those sorts of discussions over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. We are this very unique blend of tradition and new. There are certainly traditional elements of a state fair that people want to see every year. They want to know where to find those things, but then along the way, they also want to see new things. The state fair is a great place for commercial vendors to introduce new and unique products and merchandise. The unique shopping experience that is offered at the state fair is you can really communicate with people face to face, and you can do a demonstration or an example of how to use a product or more information about a service. So to communicate and do sales in person is a unique aspect of the state fair.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's so many things happening all the time, it seems like, and it really does seem like there's something for everyone. Is there an underlying mission that the Nebraska State Fair operates under? Are you there primarily to educate? Are you there to entertain the public, or is it just a whole host of things that you're trying to do all at once?
It's all those things, Rob. The Nebraska State Fair's mission is, rooted in agriculture, and it's certainly our goal each and every year to present agriculture in educational, interactive ways. We also celebrate agricultural achievements and just, overall Nebraska pride. Those are the things that you see when you walk throughout the state fair each year.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely both in favor of Nebraska pride, especially coming off the COVID year and, trying to bounce back from all the damage that has done for everyone. And I think that's a good kind of a segue to ask you if there are any sort of unsung heroes that have made it possible for the state fair to continue in tough times like that, like in the COVID year, and then kind of bouncing back to full throttle state fair this year.
Absolutely. Our volunteer pool always comes to the top of my list. Again, without those volunteers, we don't have the smiles and the welcomes and the glad you're here and the people that answer questions and to help guide people throughout their visit at the state fair. And then we have those superintendents. So a superintendent is somebody who oversees a department like the foods department or fine arts department, photography. We need those superintendents. They recruit people to help them with those exhibits, and then they also establish what contests people can enter, and then they manage those entries as well so that we have good records and good judging tactics for determining who is winning a blue ribbon or a red ribbon at the annual event.
Yeah, I can imagine that there's a number of people that we're not including in that list as well, just because to look at the operation from a nuts and bolts perspective, it really appears like there's just a ton of help coming from all sorts of directions, and from a Kevin Costner concert to the Midway with the rides and the games, and agricultural contestants and all the like. There's just a huge infrastructure that I imagine goes into that. So I just wanted to spotlight some of those more under the radar components of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there was another question I wanted to ask you was, we all see the glitz and glamour as we walk through the state fair as visitors, but I wondered if there were any misconceptions that you are always kind of coming up against in your role with the State Fair of Nebraska that you'd maybe like to address on this podcast.
Oh, that's a great question. Overall, I think we're certainly try to be a family-friendly event and, again, celebrate agriculture, Nebraska pride, and to teach youth and adults as well where their food comes from. The farm to fork concept is apparent in many aspects of the State Fair. We celebrate our history with antique factors and other exhibits throughout the ground. So we try to do the best that we can.
Yeah. I guess the only thing that really came to mind for me as someone from Lincoln and who's, been through the transition of the State Fair from Lincoln to Grand Island is I know a lot of people from Lincoln and Omaha who just weren't going to be willing to make that trip to Grand Island because I feel like there's a certain segment maybe of our state who kind of thinks civilization ends when you get to the West O exit in Lincoln. And I just think that it's worth mentioning that there is, again, something for everyone at the State Fair. And just because you're from the city, it's not 5 hours away to get to Grand Island for the State Fair.
Oh, right. No, correct. Not too far away at all. And we have further expanded some of our outreach to those areas. We partnered this year with the Nebraska Sports Council. So, of course, they host the Nebraska State Games throughout the state. And we were so excited to welcome them and a few of their sporting demonstrations. We had some pole vaulting at the fair this year, powerlifting, some great fishing demos, BMX biking. We did produce, with their help, the Nebraska State Fair Championship Cornhole tournament this year. And then we've had a marathon and a half marathon for a number of years. We partner with the local YMCA here in Grand Island and produce some sporting events as well. So, yeah, so certainly a little bit of something for everybody. You don't have to live on a farm to enjoy the Nebraska State Fair. And you don't have to live in the city to enjoy the Nebraska State Fair either. We certainly do try to have something for everyone.
Absolutely. You mentioned quite a few entertainment venues right there. I'm sure you've had your fair share of great experiences in your many years of association with the State Fair of Nebraska. Are there any more memorable moments for you that really stick out in the course of your more than 2 decades of service?
Yeah. There's quite a few. So to shorten that list, I'll just go from the top. The move to Grand Island is certainly the thing that sticks out to me the most. We arrived in Grand Island. I purchased a house here in 2009. The first state fair was held here in 2010. And it's been a wonderful, amazing, very humbling road ever since then. The way this community supports the organization and the event is unmatchable. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. That is certainly my biggest memory and most proud professional accomplishment was being able to be a part of the move of the State Fair from Lincoln to Grand Island.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to have been a tremendous undertaking, and all of that went into that in terms of the physical move, obviously, but the marketing and the development and the outreach and the fostering those new bridges of employment and volunteering and organization and all the rest of it. I imagine that would be quite memorable.
Absolutely. Just engaging with a whole new community and finding that they were so supportive and continue to be so supportive of the State Fair. They promote us throughout the year and they help us throughout the year. And then, of course, at fair time, the 11 days that spans is pretty incredible to witness and very humbling to me as a person.
Well, Jaime, I just want to say thank you for taking the time this morning. I really appreciate you being willing to join us on this podcast.
Oh, I appreciate the invitation. Thank you so much for letting us be a part. Thank you so much. And, Rob, I just would like to say what we're seeing happening over at Stuhr Museum the last year or 18 months is fabulous. The way that you all combated the same, COVID situations that the nation has been, working around. It's amazing. My child participates in a lot of your summer camps, and we love Railroad Town, and we love the big building too. I just love what we're seeing happening out at Stuhr Museum. So glad that we can be neighbors, and really appreciate what you do for our community.
Thank you so much. That's really nice to hear, and we've tried our best during these trying times, and I think we've hit the ground running with a lot of new programming, including this podcast, which we hope gives more of a voice to some of our local community leaders and community organizations, the State Fair included. And yeah, we're doing our best is all I can say. So I really appreciate that.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I want you to know how many people appreciate Stuhr Museum and all that represents for our state as well. So thank you, Rob, and Stuhr Museum.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to keep returning the favor. This is going to conclude another episode of the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. We really hope you enjoyed yourselves talking about the State Fair today. If you liked what you heard and would like to hear more historic fun content, please join us again next week where we are going to delve into the topic of baseball in Nebraska. I'm going to be joined by Megan Arrington-Williams from the Stuhr Museum Foundation, and then later we are going to head out to St. Paul, Nebraska and be speaking with somebody from the Major League Baseball History Museum in St. Paul, Nebraska. So stick with us and we'll be back next Friday with more of the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. Have a good week.